Us tonight at 10, I'm Cameron Kelly. New information, efforts to reimagine policing in Madison were front and center today. The city's Office of the Independent Monitor released new insights and recommendations that could shape future policies within the Madison Police Department. Community members heard firsthand what strategies are being proposed. WMTV's Shayna Najawan was at the gathering. Shayna, what did you learn?
The latest report outlines how data analysis, community input, and policy suggestions could support both officers and the people they serve.
You know, Madison has a lot of strengths.
Amelia Royko-Maurer, a member of Madison's community response team, has watched local activism evolve in Madison over the years.
There's beauty, there's struggle, and there are people who care, who are doing the good work.
She said she's encouraged by the Office of the Independent Monitor's commitment to using unbiased data to make the community safer.
What I am heartened to see is that we have someone who's processing data, and this is the critical piece, who has no stake in a positive or negative outcome outside of just seeing people be safer.
At Madison Central Library Saturday, community members gathered to hear directly from the office.
In the report, we have 7 recommendations.
It just released its annual report, examining police practices and community feedback to identify areas where policy changes may be needed.
And those address various, issues with Madison Police Department with the hope of improving or rectifying things.
One key suggestion, training officers in a new situational decision-making approach developed at the University of Chicago.
That shows a very high magnitude of beneficial impact, reduced use of force, reduced discretionary arrests, reduced arrest of Black individuals, dramatic reduction in officer injuries.
The report also focused on changing how use of force complaints have been handled in the past.
The point is not to relitigate past incidents. The point is to understand what happened to benefit things moving forward.
The leaders say their recommendations aim to build trust and safety for both officers and residents.
The beautiful thing about that is that the brain trust that went into this whole process, at its heart, was care for everybody.
The Office of the Independent Monitor relies on community feedback, including formal complaints, to identify patterns and problems. They're encouraging anyone with concerns about police interactions to come forward, so those issues can be tracked and addressed. Live in the studio, Shayna Najawan, WMTV 15 News.